The small town of Bellwood hadn't changed in decades, a microcosm of Americana where nostalgia mingled with stagnation. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and where anything out of the ordinary was noticed immediately. Officer Frank Miller had been patrolling these streets for over 20 years, immersing himself in the rhythms of a community that both embraced and scrutinized his presence. The clock on his dashboard read 11:23 p.m. The night had been uneventful, the roads empty except for the occasional car rolling through the darkened town, a stark contrast to the bustling cities nearby where chaos often reigned. Frank liked it this way. Bellwood was a quiet place, and he took pride in having worked hard to keep it that way, viewing himself as a protector of this suburban enclave. As he drove past the town's outskirts, a flash of headlights caught his eye. A sleek black car sped past him, far above the town's speed limit. Frank scowled and flipped on his lights, his hand already reaching for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller. I'm pulling over a vehicle heading west on Route 22. Speeding violation, I'll check it out. But before we dive into the story, please tell us where you are watching from in the comments." The radio crackled in response, and Frank quickly pulled out behind the car. It didn't take long to catch up. The vehicle was a top-of-the-line sports car, shiny, black. In contrast, most locals drove modest vehicles, the type bought from dealerships in town, not the sleek models seen in big cities. Marcus's car is a cultural interloper, just as much as he is. It cuts through the town's slow pace, mirroring the way Marcus's very existence disrupts the expectations Frank and the town hold about black people. Frank's grip tightened on the steering wheel. This was Bellwood, a working-class town. People here didn't drive cars like that. He could already feel his irritation rising. As the car pulled over to the side of the road, Frank parked behind it, his eyes narrowing as he approached. His flashlight swept across the license plate out of state. He felt a flicker of annoyance. Outsiders. He stopped by the driver's window, tapping on it with his flashlight. "License and registration," Frank said, his voice gruff. The window slid down, revealing a young man, probably no older than his mid-20s. He was black, wearing a crisp designer jacket, and sitting casually in the plush leather seat of the sports car. The kid was clean-cut, his hair neat, and he glanced up at Frank with a calm, almost uninterested look in his eyes. Frank felt his stomach tighten in irritation. "You know how fast you were going?" Frank asked, even though it wasn't really a question. The young man nodded slowly, reaching into the glove compartment. "I was a little over the limit, I guess," he said coolly. His voice was calm, smooth, like someone who didn't have a care in the world. "More than a little," Frank shot back. "What's your hurry?" "No hurry," the young man said, handing over his license and registration. "Just passing through." Frank took the documents and eyed the driver's license. Marcus Caldwell, it read. He glanced at the photo, then back at the young man, a sense of irritation prickling at the back of his neck. He didn't like the attitude. The kid was too calm, too relaxed for someone who had just been pulled over. The license said the kid was from New York, some fancy address in the heart of Manhattan. Frank huffed under his breath. He'd seen this type before. Rich kids, flashy cars, acting like they owned the world. And here he was, speeding through town in the middle of the night. Frank leaned closer to the window, his tone sharper. "What are you doing around here, Caldwell?" "This isn't New York." Marcus looked at him, his eyes still calm. "Just visiting. Passing through." "Visiting who?" Frank pressed. He didn't like the way this kid was answering him. Too casual, too smooth. Marcus tilted his head slightly as if considering how much to say. A friend, Frank repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "At midnight in Bellwood?" The young man's calm demeanor didn't change. "That's right." Frank could feel his temper rising. This kid thought he could just breeze through town, no consequences, no respect for the rules. He was too polished, too comfortable in that fancy car. "Step out of the vehicle," Frank barked suddenly, his hand resting on his holster. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Yeah, the problem is you're not taking this seriously," Frank snapped. "Step out of the car, now." For a moment, Marcus hesitated, and Frank's fingers twitched, his mind racing. He'd been on this job long enough to know when someone was hiding something, and this kid was hiding something. Maybe drugs, maybe something worse. Slowly, Marcus opened the door and stepped out. Frank noticed his expensive sneakers, his designer jacket, the glint of a luxury watch on his wrist. Everything about him screamed money, and it made Frank's blood boil. He couldn't shake the feeling that this kid thought he was better than everyone in Bellwood. "Hands on the car," Frank ordered. Marcus complied without a word. his movements calm and measured. Frank patted him down quickly, looking for anything suspicious. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind already jumping to conclusions. But he found nothing, no weapons, no drugs, just a phone, a wallet, and the keys to the car. Frank pulled out Marcus's wallet and flipped through it, his eyes widening as he glanced at the contents. The kid wasn't just rich, he was loaded. Platinum credit cards, business cards with logos Frank didn't even recognize, and a wad of cash thicker than Frank's entire weekly paycheck. "Are you some kind of drug dealer?" Frank asked, his voice harsh. "You think you can just come into this town, throw your money around, and do whatever you want?" Marcus turned his head slightly, his expression still infuriatingly calm. "I'm not a drug dealer." Frank's jaw tightened. "Then what are you?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He stood up slowly, his eyes meeting Frank's with a level gaze that was almost unnerving. "I'm a businessman." Frank scoffed, but before he could say anything, Marcus continued, his voice steady. "I own Caldwell Industries. We're a venture capital firm in New York." Frank blinked. Caldwell Industries? The name rang a faint bell, but he couldn't place it. "Never heard of it." "You wouldn't," Marcus said, his tone matter of fact. "We deal with tech startups, clean energy companies, and international investments. My company's worth over $1 billion. Frank stared at him, his mind reeling. $1 billion? He almost laughed. This kid was pulling his leg, he had to be. $1 billion, huh? Frank said sarcastically, waving the wallet in the air. "You expect me to believe that?" Marcus's calm gaze never wavered. "Google it." Frank hesitated, his stomach twisting with uncertainty. This was ridiculous. There was no way this kid was telling the truth. But the confidence in Marcus's voice, the sheer unshakable calm, made him pause. Against his better judgment, Frank pulled out his phone and typed in Caldwell Industries into the search bar. The results popped up immediately and Frank felt his throat tighten as he scrolled through the information. Articles, business profiles, interviews, all with Marcus Caldwell's face plastered next to headlines that made Frank's head spin. Youngest black billionaire in America, the tech mogul disrupting the energy sector, from humble beginnings to global success. Frank's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the screen. It didn't make sense. This kid, this young black kid driving through his small town in the middle of the night was telling the truth. He really was a billionaire. Frank's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. How had he gotten this so wrong? "I see you found what you were looking for," Marcus said quietly, his voice still calm but with an edge now. Frank swallowed hard, his hand dropping from his phone. He looked at Marcus, suddenly unsure of what to say. He had been so ready to jump to conclusions, to make assumptions based on nothing but the color of Marcus's skin and the car he was driving. And now, standing there with the cold reality staring him in the face, he felt like a fool. "Look, Frank began, but the words died in his throat. What could he say? That he hadn't expected this? That he didn't believe someone like Marcus could ever be more than some punk breaking the law? Marcus straightened up, his eyes hardening slightly as he pocketed his wallet and phone. "Is there anything else, officer?" Frank shook his head slowly, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had been wrong, so wrong. "No," Frank muttered, "you're free to go." Marcus didn't say anything. He simply turned and walked back to his car, his movements smooth and deliberate. Frank watched him, feeling the sting of humiliation settle deep in his chest. As Marcus slid into the driver's seat and the engine purred to life, Frank stood there, frozen in place, watching the taillights disappear into the night. For the first time in his career, Frank Miller felt a shift in the world around him, one he hadn't expected, and one he wasn't sure he could ever fully understand. What started as a routine traffic stop turned into a shocking discovery that left Officer Frank Miller questioning his assumptions and facing a hard truth about the world he thought he knew. Sometimes, the people we least expect can surprise us the most, and in those moments we're forced to confront our own biases. Thanks for watching Divided Realities. If you're ready for more eye-opening stories that uncover the hidden truths of our world, make sure to hit that button and turn on notifications. Don't miss out on the next video, it's one you won't want to miss.